Hey guys, welcome back for another episode of Not the Girl Next Door. I'm your host, Meg Reynolds, and this is the final episode for Women's History Month. So I felt it was so important to bring this guest back on. You know, obviously in the events going on in the world, we're seeing a big rise in traditional quote unquote values and that kind of content. And this week's guest is somebody who has gone against the norm and has made an entire career out of it. And I've had her on the podcast before, and I felt like we just still had so much more to talk about. So it means the world to me that she made the time to come back on. We've got Beth Gulotta from Quiet the Clock back with us. And Beth, welcome back to the podcast.
Oh my gosh, I'm so happy to be here. And I have always loved our conversations. I'm so excited to have another one together. I'm so honored to be part of this Women's History Month conversation. Very, very excited. Thank you for having me back.
Of course. And for the people who are listening, if you haven't listened to Beth and I's episode last season, definitely go check that out because it's going to really tie into what I wanted to talk about with Beth today. The title of that episode was Wisdom versus Willingness. And we talked all about how you don't have to go with the grain of timelines, especially in your 20s. And Beth, your entire career was realizing you wanted to leave finance. And so with kind of continuing that conversation, I really want to dive into the idea of, are we actually living or are we just checking boxes? Because I think that is so not talked about of how do you determine, one, if you're just trying to check boxes, how figuring out if these are your dreams versus somebody else's. And, you know, it's a big part of the healing journey to figure out what is true happiness to you. And we kind of started to touch on that last episode, and I felt like we kind of ran out of time.
Yeah, I mean, that's such a big question. And I think it's unique and different to everybody. And a lot of work I do, as I'm also a mental health counselor, I have a group therapy practice, and a lot of work I do with clients is kind of getting to the core of what is their truest desires. What are the things that they actually want? Because what's layered over that is really buried deep sometimes, because what's layered over that is blueprints that are outdated, societal norms and expectations that have ingrained in us, external pressures of what we should be doing by when. And sometimes we're just kind of moving through life informed by these external narratives, not really checking in with ourselves of like, is this what I want? Is this what makes me happy? So first I want to normalize like not knowing what that is or what that looks like. Because a lot of people don't, you know, I ask, it seems like a very simple question to say, you know, what do you want? What makes you happy? And for a lot of people, they don't know. And I feel like for a lot of people, we're not encouraged to think about those things until we're like later into adulthood or young adulthood. So normalizing not knowing that, I think, is really important. But then, doing the work to figure out what that is and to, remove those layers that kind of keep that buried very deep inside, to remove those voices or those influential expectations that are clouding your ability to truly see what you want and what makes you happy.
Yeah. And like, it kind of goes back to our conversation too. We were talking about defining success for yourself. And that's why I really wanted to dive into this topic today, because it's, you know, success and checking boxes in life really go hand in hand, like those two things. And it's a lot of the times the happiness piece falls short because also I think I'm trying to think how to word this, like, how do you know if you're happy? Like, where is the source of your happiness in a sense? Like, are you be happy because other people are saying you're successful, or are you genuinely happy because you feel fulfilled and you're not living for the sake of others? And I know you and I talked about this a lot, where I felt like I was doing that for most of my life, and I'm so happy I did the work at such a young age. And, you know, I think I've been very nostalgic lately and talked about this a lot on the podcast, like as I'm approaching 5 years since I've graduated college and 1 year of being my own business owner and just really reconnecting with my younger self and all of that. And it's just made me so nostalgic. And I think that's a big piece of it too, is why people are craving the simpler traditional time. And all of these things are so layered together.
Oh, yeah, so layered. I mean, you should be so proud of yourself. What amazing things to accomplish. And, you know, that was part of our conversations about the work that you did to get there. And it's true in that it is work to kind of peel back those layers and understand what is authentic to you. And certainly a lot of the work that I do is helping people break down these constructs or these ideas of what very outdated, very concrete ideas, though, of what we deem as successful. And a lot of what we deem as successful are these sort of milestone accomplishments. Right. So what are the educational milestones, check boxes? Maybe it's college, maybe it's grad school. What are the professional check boxes? Maybe it's a corporate job. And then relationally, like marriage, family building, all of that. We have like to your point, we have so tightly blended those things together or tied those things together that we deem those as the markers of success. Mm-hmm. We deem those as the markers of a happiness. And a lot of the work that I do, my practice with my clients is to dismantle those, to rewrite our own definitions of success, rewrite our own definitions of happiness, and letting that definition, our own authentic, true definition, define what those things are and guide us into what we choose to do, who we choose to be with, what type of work we do. And that's not easy to do. And what I see a lot in my practice is even when we get to the place of identifying what is going to make me happy, what is it that I want to do, then we have to unpack all the layers and all the narratives of why we can't do that thing. I really want to move to Europe for a year. And then we've got 10 to 20 to 30 narratives behind that saying why we can't do that.
Right. And it's that old adage of, it's always easier said than done. Like, it's not that simple. It's not that easy. And of course it's not. Nothing worth having in life is going to be simple or easy. Like I've been having to reconcile with that too, especially being on my own now and seeing all these other podcasts and influencers and writers and photographers, videographers who are seemingly so much farther ahead, quote unquote, than I am. But it's like, but how much longer have they been doing this? What did their career look like when they were in my position? Like,
totally.
And, it goes back to that thing of comparison's the thief of joy, and learning how to silence outside noise and really listen to your heart is, but that comes with knowing oneself. And all of this comes back to, do you know yourself is the question.
Yeah. And are you giving even when you know yourself, are you giving yourself permission to be yourself? Right. So again, if we identify those pieces or parts of ourselves that are truly authentic to who we are, what we desire, what we want, are we giving ourselves to the permission to live that? So I think there's a 2-part process. I mean, we could go on and on about comparison. I mean, on and on about comparison. What I'll say about comparison is that we have to be really, really careful of that we are comparing ourselves to the right thing, right? Sometimes we're comparing ourselves to the facade that we see on social media. Sometimes we're unfairly comparing ourselves. So you might be comparing yourself to a podcaster that, to your point, has been doing it 8 years. The more appropriate comparison was like, okay, I'm at year 2. Where were they at year 2? So you can't compare your year 2 to year 8. So you got to be really careful about what you're comparing to, because sometimes comparison isn't all that bad. Comparison can be motivating. Comparison can be learning. Comparison can be a cue to like what you want to aspire to or what your goals are.
It's a good teacher too. Like, what are they doing differently that's working, and how can I make it my own? And I think that's the beauty of being creatives and stuff, is learning from others and making things our own. And compare, like you said, comparison's not always bad, but I think some people let comparison eat them alive to the point it cripples them, and it makes them fearful of like, see, I'm never going to be successful because look, they think because somebody else is successful means that they can't also be successful. I feel like a lot of the times is what happens.
Yeah, I mean, there's I don't know the right saying, but there's a piece of pie for everybody. It's not, and that's a scarcity mindset to think that because they have it, I can't, or because they have it, like there's no room for me at the table. No, it's not true. I mean, we live in such an abundant time and an abundant culture. Like there's so much opportunity and possibility. And the other thing I would say about comparison is I always like to remind people, like, you can't just compare to one sliver of someone's life. Like, you look at the whole picture. So for example, I have a friend that, I'm on the secondary infertility journey. I have a friend that just found out she's pregnant with her second baby. So now if I'm only comparing to like, she's pregnant with her second, I'm going to feel really awful. But if I look at the whole picture, it's not a life I want. It's not a relationship I want. So I think it's really important to like, would you trade places with that person? Or are we only looking at the one thing that you actually desire and saying they have it and I don't?
Yeah. No, and that's such a good point too, because you also then don't know what it's cost those people to get where they are. Like, did it cost them personal relationships, romantic relationships? How much did they have to sacrifice to get where they are? And are you willing to do those things, same exact things? And a lot of the times the answer may be no, because you also don't know, is that person truly happy and fulfilled, or were they checking their own boxes?
Yeah. And again, kind of back to doing the sort of internal work. If you're really grounded in what you want, what you desire, confident in your ability to kind of get there, then you're going to be less influenced by what other people are doing.
Right. No, and that definitely makes sense. And something else I wanted to talk about too with this idea of just checking boxes. A big piece of therapy is obviously confronting ourselves and our past. And I think a lot of the times, obviously, people may be lying to themselves. And how, as a therapist, are you able to spot when somebody's lying to themselves and to you? And how do you kind of approach and call out that behavior?
That's a great question. I mean, yeah, people can come to therapy and hide. People can come to therapy and be in denial. People can come into therapy and have distortion of reality. People can come into therapy and have disassociation, so lack of memory of childhood and developmental years, really formative years. It's really the therapist's job to pay very close attention to patterns and behaviors and language and narratives that they use, and starting to help get curious about the origin of those narratives. Like, everything comes from somewhere. So paying really, really close attention to those presenting narratives, those presenting behaviors, presenting thought patterns, and started like staying with the client's pace. I mean, it's really a skill to kind of meet the client where they're at and not confront too early. So, really relying heavily in those instances on the therapeutic relationship and trust and safety, and slowly starting to, I like to say, get curious about, well, where did that originate? Like, when did you first see that? Or when did you first feel that? And slowly helping them confront those things. You don't ever want to call someone out in a way that's going to be harmful, or certainly harmful to therapeutic relationship. But yeah, people try to come in and hide, and avoidance is a coping mechanism. And so any good therapist will be attentive to those things happening in the room.
And how do you think speaking of avoidance and maybe even anxious attachment, how do you think those kinds of attachment styles can kind of lead people into the just checking a box thing? And like, where do you think, the pattern breaks and like the pattern stops? Like, what does it take for someone to, because again, all these things are so nuanced and intertwined, right? And it's not just one simple answer, but how do you think of attachment styles kind of maybe influence people's living to just check?
Completely. I mean, I think everything comes back to relational work. How do we relate to people? How do we relate to ourselves? How do we relate to the world around us? What are the messaging and narratives that we're most influenced by? I mean, an anxiously attached person is going to be constantly seeking validation. And if they're not really connected to the things that make them feel validated, it's external validation. So we are going to be really more susceptible to the things that society deems are validating and the things that society deems are worthy. So someone with a more anxious attachment style might be more prone to checking the boxes, seeking that external validation, recognizing that these certain things are recognized as success. In terms of breaking in the pattern, at first it's understanding the pattern. And some of the ways you can start to do that, even if you're not in therapy, is getting really in tune with your body. Like, how are you feeling? How are you feeling in your body? Like, if you are somebody that's checking the boxes, like, your body's going to cue you. If you're not happy, if you're not fulfilled, your body will tell you how you feel in those environments around certain people. It will tell you. You mentioned I worked in finance. Like, my body told me that was not the place for me. My body told me, like, this is not forever for me. I was anxious. I was uncomfortable. I would cry. I mean, it was very, very clear. What gets problematic about that, we can rationalize those cues away, and we can assign it to something else, or you normalize it and say, well, everybody feels this way.
Right.
And so really how you start to break the pattern, again, if you're not in therapy, like therapy is amazing and great, but if that's not accessible to you or you're not ready to be in that space, I would say start to tune in to your body and the cues, and don't overlook those things. Don't ignore those things.
Right. And it's funny too, because like even with your body's cues, like we've seen this in dating too. Like I've talked about this with a couple of friends, how like your body as women, we know, like our body knows when we're not with the right man. Like a friend of mine, she was seeing somebody, and towards the end of their relationship, when things started to get rocky, she all of a sudden was getting like all these random weird symptoms. Like she was spotting so much, and like just something she knew, her body knew something wasn't right before she cognizantly knew something was wrong. And
because our mind will mess with us. Our mind will make sense of things in ways that is so disconnected from what our body is telling us.
For sure. And like, I remember too, the relationship you and I spoke about, I remember towards the end of it, like at certain points, like my hair was falling out in chunks, and like I was so inflamed, and just, it's crazy how we as women are almost like, we're so intuitive, but we're like told to suppress that intuition. And what would you say to young women who are really struggling to reconcile if this is like my gut and I need to listen to this feeling, or if I'm truly feeling anxious, avoidance, whatever?
It's a difficult question, because I think we're moving in a better direction to support or create more spaces for women to tune into themselves more, and for people to be listening to women when they tune into themselves more. I don't think we're quite there for young women or any woman that is trying to do this work and try to really get more connected to their authentic self, and what they actually desire is to, and this is not easy, is to seek out those spaces. Find one, even if it's one space where you can really truly be yourself, and there's a lot of safety there, and you can express and communicate, and have someone hold that space for you is super important. So I would say for anyone, like if it's possible, find that place. It's difficult. Like there are still a lot of spaces where even when women are their authentic selves, we get pushback. People are trying to like dull us down, not support us. Don't get me started on the fertility space and what's happening there.
There's so
much.
To
Seek out those spaces that are really going to lift you up and really going to support this exploration of self.
Yeah. And obviously there's so much going on with women's health and fertility and all these. You're like understatement of the century.
Oh, girl, I don't know if you want me to unleash here right now, but I could.
Please. I mean, my next question was going to be, obviously in terms of making space and finding yourself, like I think a big thing we've seen lately, while we're also seeing the rise of, traditional role content and all that stuff. And there's a big conversation of, we don't want to lose young women to the alt-right pipeline for women as well. But on the flip side, we're seeing a lot of rising conversations surrounding regretful mothers and regretful parents. And, it's both two sides that are very difficult conversations. But, how do you think for young women who are questioning, do I want children? How do you think they can approach this conversation and, approach things of maybe I want to freeze my eggs because I want children later in life, just not now? Like, how can women, make that space for themselves?
Number one, listen to my podcast.
Yes, please go listen.
I think we have a lot more work to do in those spaces. I think we have a lot more work to do to normalize women making choices to not have children. And we have episodes on all these topics. And it's amazing, everything has two sides to it, right? Social media is amazing in so many ways, and it has its downfalls as well. But there's a lot of women on there, accounts on there that are sharing their stories of childless by choice. And I think it's really amazing to start normalizing and perpetuating new blueprints, right? Because we have had one blueprint for so long. And it's this idea that womanhood, for so long, it's been this idea that womanhood is synonymous with motherhood. And so we need to kind of like disconnect that. And we need to be able to be in a space to honor everybody's choices. Like if you don't want to have a child, that's amazing for you. if you're someone that doesn't want to have a child, but other people do, that's amazing for them. And we need to get on the same page and support everybody's choices.
Yeah.
You can also kind of see some judgment, or, people can be really harsh online too. You can see some judgment or stones thrown at somebody that's making a different decision than you. And I think there's obviously still work to be done to offer more compassion, even curiosity of like, oh, okay, why is that your choice? I'd love to learn more about that. Again, seeking out the spaces that are normalizing different choices is important. And there are women making all different choices and talking about it now, which is really incredible.
Yeah, I think when it comes to the leading, I've talked about the leading with curiosity thing a lot. We had Sabrina Zohar on the podcast last week, and she talked about this in terms of dating, how, you want to lead with curiosity in relationships and ask questions of like, okay, well, this is what I'm picking up on. Are we on the same page? And I think that kind of ideal can be applied to all areas of our life. I think people nowadays are so quick to judge and attack rather than lead with curiosity, because it's almost like people think, well, because somebody chooses differently than me, then that means my way, one of us has to be wrong. We can't both be right. And it's just like, no, that's not the case. There's no right or wrong, especially when you're talking about bringing a child into the world. Like, that should not be, I think, who you marry, having a child, like those are very big life decisions. And for so long, I feel like they were almost just like, well, nope, you have to do this. This is just what we do as people.
Yeah, I mean, there was one blueprint, and to your point, like I also think there is this my choice. Not just one is right or wrong. One is better than the other, and I think there's just more work to be done to honor all choices. Not one is right, not one is wrong, not one is better than the other. I love Sabrina, and I love curiosity. I think it is such an amazing perspective and even a tool. And it's interesting to bring up like curiosity in dating, because I've had so many women on talk about like, when do I talk about egg freezing? If I've frozen my eggs, or if I'm thinking about freezing my eggs on a date, when do we think about, when do we talk about like our vision for a family? And it's been really interesting to learn and hear from guests about how they wish they were more curious and more clear about the partner's thoughts, even asking more in-depth questions about, say we have fertility struggles. Are you open to adoption? Are you open to embryo adoption? And like, really, there's more layers to the conversations. There's more layers to the curiosity, especially around family building. It's not just, do you want to have children? It's, if we can't have biological children, are you open to these other things? Unfortunately, infertility is on the rise. And so many women and so many families and partners are finding themselves in this boat to have to really explore alternative paths to parenthood.
Yeah. And it's crazy too, because obviously we've talked about my struggles with PCOS. I'm already mentally prepared for like those fertility struggles, and I'm doing everything I can in my 20s to get healthy and like maybe prevent some of those issues down the line. But it's also, I've even started thinking about that. And my dog, you and I talked about this last episode, how I was like, I still don't know if I want children, but I feel like being with the right partner will make me want a child with him. But it's just crazy because I'm 26. In 4 years, when I'm 30, am I going to want to start freezing my, these are all things that I'm starting to think about now. And it's so incredibly overwhelming. And obviously I know you're on your fertility journey, like for women out there who are thinking about it, like how did you mentally kind of, I guess, like prepare and deal with these things? And what is something that maybe you wish you knew at the start of your fertility journey? Am I giving you your own?
First of all, I always am so impressed by you and just kind of where you are at your age and your perspective and
that's the trauma.
That you do. Huh? It's trauma? Did you say it's trauma?
The trauma.
Oh, the trauma. No, but even I think it's inspiring. It's helpful for other women to hear, and especially women in your age group, to hear that you are proactive about your fertility health, right? And understand, I mean, you're even ahead of the game knowing that you have PCOS. Like that goes undiagnosed for so long.
So long.
And also just having it be an overall desire to be healthy and to understand your health, especially at this age where maybe you're not preparing for egg freezing, or you're not thinking about children yet, or you're still deciding if you want children, maybe disentangling it. It's about my fertility health. No, it's about my overall health. Mm-hmm. We have a big educational gap to close when it comes to women's health and fertility health. So, one is just understanding your body and how your body works. I recorded a really great episode yesterday. Oh my gosh, yesterday, with a dietitian with a huge focus on fertility health and women's health. And we talked about this need to be more proactive about our health. We find ourselves a lot of times in a reactive state.
Yes.
This is what the fucking fertility world is. Sorry to curse on your podcast.
No, I drop the F-bomb like I get paid to do it. So okay. Feel free.
Yeah. And it's important for every woman to know their health, their hormone health, their fertility health. It's not just linked to whether or not I want to have children. It's linked to so many other things. You want to make sure your body's functioning optimally. And if you have someone that has PCOS or has endometriosis, there are so many things you can do through lifestyle nutrition supplementation that will support hopefully a very successful fertility journey if that's your choice.
Yeah. It's crazy too, like, because this is something else I was going to bring up was this topic of self-care and how important it is. Because obviously you see like, on TikTok, like the morning shed and like, that's just crazy to me. Like that stuff is out there. But for me, I've noticed when I get stressed, my self-care routine suffers. And when I'm not doing my self-care routine, my life gets more chaotic and it becomes this like vicious cycle. And for some reason, as women, I feel like we have a tendency when everything in our lives gets crazy and noisy, our taking care of ourselves always goes to the back burner. I feel like men don't do that as much as women, but it's what we were trained to do. And I don't know if like you have any advice for women when they're feeling stressed about like how they can make sure they're still prioritizing themselves.
Yeah. I mean, what I've been personally working on is slowing down. I think we are overscheduled, overworked, particularly as women. We wear multiple hats. We're naturally inclined to be nurturers and caregivers and taking care of other people. I mean, it's so nuanced and layered. But slow down. Everybody is moving at such a rapid, fast pace. And what we were talking about earlier, if we're trying to tune into ourselves, if we're trying to listen to our bodies, like it is impossible. And I'm not saying that it's easy. I am very guilty of this myself. It's been a huge learning lesson for me in the secondary infertility journey to step back and slow down. So that would be my first suggestion. It's just slow down. And that doesn't even have to mean like get everything off your calendar and have an open day. It's just like slow down when you're making your coffee, slow down when you're drinking your coffee, slow down when I'm no expert in like nutrition and gut health and anything, but like, I'm pretty sure you're supposed to like slow down when you eat. So just being slower and more intentional about how you move through the day is one small thing you can change tomorrow. And then there's a plethora of other things you can do, but we're all moving too fast and we're all overscheduled and overbooked.
Yeah, I literally don't.
But again, that comes back to
my calendar.
Like, yeah, I bet. But it all comes back to why? Why are we doing that? Why? What are we in pursuit of? Is this actually how we want to live? Is this working to the goals that are really authentic to ourselves? Like, why are we caught up in this whole hustle culture? Like, I think asking yourself why we're moving at this pace, we're overscheduling, overbooking, like what's the purpose of it?
Yeah. And I feel like that chronic exhaustion is almost maybe potentially why we're seeing such a rise in tradwife content and that kind of homesteading content, because it is a slower pace and people are craving that. And I know for me, myself, like I feel like, women with PCOS, you see like when women get their stress levels in check, their weight loss comes 10 times easier. And that's something I've noticed for myself is when I hit a plateau in my weight loss, or if I'm feeling particularly inflamed and bloated, I'm like, okay, what have I been doing lately? I am running around ragged. I'm constantly rushing. Like, even if it's just taking 2 hours to rot on my couch, if that's what I need to lower my body's stress, I need to honor that. And I'm getting better at doing that because
but hold on, because even the way you said that, there is judgment and shame attached to it. Like 2 hours to rot on my couch. You've already deemed it like awful, unproductive. Like why? That's the problem, right? Because again, we identify what we need and then we have all these terrible narratives telling myself, why can't I do that? So even the way you said, like, I'm going to rot, it's such a bad narrative.
That's so true. Cause I'll never forget one of the first things like years ago when I started working with my therapist, that she told me was, you need to learn to be bored. She was like, you need to learn that it's okay to just be bored. Your schedule doesn't need to be packed. And I think I'm somebody for so many years that felt like if I'm not doing anything, I'm being lazy, or like it's those narratives that we've been trained. And, especially being a type A person, and I was always a high achiever in school. It's like, I always am feeling like I need to beat, quote unquote, my
Yeah. And
past
again, it's
self.
like, what is the function of that behavior? Why did that behavior originate? It comes from somewhere. I mean, I had a client that so many clients and so many women are these sort of type A overachievers, highly ambitious.
We need a club, a support group.
Yeah. And, usually if you boil it down and get to the root of it, there's a reason why those type of behaviors developed. But yeah, it's really, we're constantly overstimulated.
Mm-hmm.
We definitely don't we definitely don't know how to be bored. And it's not even about being bored. It's just being slower, being quieter, getting more in tune, like drowning out the noise. There's no way to hear yourself when we're constantly overstimulated. And then we're going to keep chasing the wrong things, going after things that are not fulfilling or purposeful or aligned with who we are and what we really want. It's too much noise. It's way too much noise. There's too much noise.
Yeah. And before you know it, you blink and it's like your life has gone by and you don't know yourself. And that is, I think, one of my biggest fears in life is I never want to feel like I've lost myself and I don't know myself. And I think for women, that's a big conversation around motherhood right now and I've been seeing a lot of this discourse of how single women feel like they're losing their friends who become moms, and mother friends are feeling unsupported. So how do you think as women, we can kind of bridge that gap and start coming back together? Because I think it's almost, that is becoming an alienated thing that doesn't need to happen. Like, we need to be banding together and supporting each other and building those villages again.
Yeah, I know. We really should be our biggest cheerleaders. And, I think it's very challenging to navigate sort of these decades of our lives where, for most of our lives up into our early 20s, everybody's on the same path, everybody's on the same timeline. And then we graduate and somebody's going to grad school and somebody's moving to the city. And so it's the first time in our life that we're seeing the paths go in different directions. And I don't think that's talked about enough, and how to navigate that in friendship and how to maintain friendship through those changes. And I don't want to say misalignments, but just different life paths. And then when you get down the road a little bit further and somebody's in a relationship and then somebody's getting married and then there's that relatability, that thread that used to tie you in terms of like, we're in the same place in our lives at the same time, is not there anymore. So if it's a friendship that's really valuable to you, you have to kind of, in the same way we're always growing and taking on new identities, and you have to find a new identity for the friendship. It's not going to just stay the same. So what does the friendship look like now that my friend has a child? Okay, it's not going to be we're at the club till 3 a.m. all the time, but maybe it's, I go for a walk with her on Sunday. And so it's sort of evolving the friendship and finding that new commonality, that new relatability that keeps you connected. I think what often happens so much is like, change is hard for people. And when the relationship looks different, they deem that not as good of a relationship anymore. It's not what it used to be. But yeah, it's very possible to maintain solid friendship if they're actually really good friendships through these life changes and transitions. But yeah, we have to be our biggest supporter. And then, it gets difficult because comparison comes in or envy comes in. And, for my friend and I that I was talking about earlier, like, it's been a bumpy road for us to navigate the different timing in our lives of when somebody has hit somebody else. But really at the core, if you love that person, you can all hold space for all of it, and it's really honesty, transparency, communication, evolving, finding that common thread. I love this. Someone had shared this idea with me of like cutting the cord on a relationship. And it doesn't mean ending the relationship, but it's cutting the cord on the old dynamic relationship. Like, that is gone. That was amazing. That was great. But this is the new version of this relationship.
Yeah. I think, in our 20s, like you said, it's the first time we've talked about this before. It's the first time we're not all on the same page, but not only that, like, we're not all, like, our lives aren't it's not only the first time our lives aren't planned out for us, but it's the first time we get to make our own choices. And I think that's a big piece of it, is because then people are really examining, well, what do I want? And obviously, before even 30 years ago, everyone still was kind of on the same page in the sense of you had kids, you got married. Like that was what people did. Now there's more choice, which is a beautiful thing, but it leads to complexities in friendships. And something I also talked about with on a recent episode is I had one of my best friends on, and we talked about how, as women, we tend to be harsher on our female friends than we are on male like partners, where we'll give a guy a million chances and he can disrespect us all he wants. But for some reason, when it comes to our girlfriends, if they mess up once, they're out. And I don't know, as a therapist, if you have thoughts on maybe why that tends to happen, or how we can change that behavior as women and get better at communicating with our friends. Because a lot of times, I think, like you said, we're robbing ourselves of some of the best relationships of our lives. And just like any relationship, a friendship, still, you're going to fight. You need to work through those issues.
Totally.
Like, it's just like any other relationship.
Yeah. Well, I think, in a lot of relationships, expectations are different, right? So it can be that with, men or male counterparts or whoever you're dating, it's like the standard's not as high, or like, oh, expect them to do that. With our girls, we want them to be our ride or dies. We want them to have our back. We want them to, the expectation is so high. The standard is so high. Like, this is my girl. She's always going to have my back. But I think in any relationship, it's always important to see someone for who they really are, see somebody for their capacity to give and hold space, right? If we're setting unrealistic expectations for somebody or a friendship, we're going to be constantly disappointed. For instance, this is like a silly example, but if you have a friend that's like notorious late, like don't ever expect them to be on time, and just roll it. Like if you love them, roll with it. Like, okay, she's the one that's always late. But if I'm like, she's late all the time and I'm pissed at her every single time, it's like, it's kind of on me, because I'm not recognizing who she is and I'm not understanding sort of her capacity. But like in any relationship, like conflict is not a bad thing. It's how do we manage conflict? So if something comes up with a friend, being really vulnerable and honest about how you feel is hugely beneficial to the relationship. And I think we are too quick sometimes to cut those things off, but then that has to be like a self-examination of like, why am I doing that?
Yeah. And that's, for me, I think I'm the friend that always stays too long and gives too many chances. And I've done that in dating, and we're getting better at that. And, I think when it comes to relationships, it all really does boil back to knowing yourself and trusting yourself. And it's crazy how so many different aspects of our life do get better when we do the work on ourselves and we get to know ourselves.
Yes. And honoring our needs. I have so many clients that like don't, or are the people pleasers, don't ask for what they need in the relationship, and they're completely unhappy, but they stay in those relationships. And when you do the work to get connected to what you want and you need, and you understand that, and then you get to a place where you're able to communicate that, you have game-changing relationships. Game-changing relationships.
And so for people who are in therapy, or whether they're in therapy or not, and they're kind of, examining these things, confronting their own confronting their own issues, finding themselves, all of this work that we're doing on ourselves. For people who have, maybe stopped dating and want to start dating again, what do you think are some ways somebody can know if they're ready to start dating again, or not even just dating, but maybe take some sort of next step in their life, like becoming a mother or any of these other big life-changing milestone decisions?
Yeah, I think it's a tricky one. I think there's always the importance to honor readiness, and being really clear about what that is for you. That's different for anybody, whether we're talking about dating or marriage or parenthood, is to get really clear on readiness. However, being really mindful that we're not creating narratives of like, I'm not ready, but it's really like, I'm too scared. So it's being clear and making that differentiation. And then again, I think that, you can use curiosity here too. It's like, why aren't I ready? What is my vision of readiness? Is my vision of readiness even attainable? Am I creating a vision of readiness that is so far out that like, I keep myself safe and protected because I'll never get to that level of readiness. So again, approaching that concept and idea of readiness with curiosity and understanding what's informing whether or not you're ready, while also being mindful, or am I avoiding? Am I trying to keep myself safe? Am I not moving towards this next step because I'm scared? So kind of analyzing that. And then, I think there's also room for like, life can still just be fun. Like you can go out there and just like get curious about who's out there, have a fun conversation with anybody without attaching any pressure to it. Like we should still like go out and live our lives and have fun. And, not everything has to be working towards an outcome. Not every experience has to be about meeting somebody. Not every experience has to be about the thing that's going to lead me to motherhood, or there's room for so much more. And I think leaving some space for fun and playfulness and curiosity is really important. And I guess another thing I could add to that is like patience and trust, and just kind of trusting that your life is going to unfold in the way that it should, in the timing that it should, that the universe is going to present you with things that are meant for you if you're open and you're clear. I think all of that together, if you can practice all of those things together, like life can look really beautiful.
Yeah, I think people, myself included, I'm guilty of this. We take life too seriously. And
Yes.
this leads back into the stress conversation, is we're putting unnecessary stress and pressure on ourselves when life is already so filled with challenges and stress. And obviously everyone's comes from different backgrounds. So you have different adversities that you've had to overcome. And it's just, yeah, it all bleeds into slowing down, knowing yourself and trusting yourself.
Have fun, have fun, dialing it back a bit. In my life, in a lot of the experiences of my clients, like the most amazing, beautiful things have come to them in periods of patience, in periods of gratitude, in periods of taking the pressure off.
Mm-hmm. Why do you think that is? That's when things happen.
Oh gosh, I think there's so many reasons. I think one, there's an openness to receive. There's less stress and anxiety in your body, which I think again creates like a state of receiving that's very different. Like when you're kind of trying to like hold on to everything so tightly, like you almost think your body's so clenched and there's no room for anything to come in because you're like controlling everything and you're controlling the timeline. And if you're kind of like, I'm going to see how this goes. It's like, there's more room, there's more space. And so I think letting go of a little bit of control creates more space for things to come in.
It's really hard for us control freaks and type A people to do.
They're so hard, but it's like, it's really interesting. Like I really very much, like I am very much of like, I want to control things, and also, a lot of the women that I work with or the audience that I speak to on the podcast are these very successful women that have learned, like, if I put in the hard work, if I do all the things, I get the outcome, whether that's the degree, the job. And then when you apply that to relationship and fertility and motherhood, it doesn't apply. So it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how hard you work. Some of those things are still really out of your control. And yeah, part of some of this work we're talking about is, how do I let go of some of that control? How do I be more in faith and trust? And I don't say that lightly. It's not easy to do.
Yeah. And obviously, I know you're a very successful woman. You work with a lot of successful women. I feel like there's also a big narrative nowadays of how successful women have a harder time in dating. And there's statistics to back that up. It is just like a known thing. And I feel like, do you think some women are holding themselves back because of the fear of how it's going to affect their romantic life? And kind of tandeming off that question, like, how do you think women can confront those feelings of feeling like they're not going to be able to find a partner purely because of how successful they are?
Oh, yeah. We've had guests on here trying to like, think about that question and pick that question apart. I think it is so layered. I don't think there's one answer to that. I continue to try to have more men on the podcast to understand their perspective and how they're approaching dating. I think we have an idea of what's happening for us in our dating experience is not similar to how men are seeing it. I think our tendency is to feel like we're intimidating to other men. Our success is intimidating to them, where men might say, no, it's not that, but you're too in the masculine. You're not letting us, there's no space for us. You don't need us. And they want to feel needed. And then I think there is some onus on us where we could be very limited in who we think is worthy of us and kind of who we want. I think there's, I had a really great guest on, John Berger, who talked about, I forgot exactly how he put it, but is it not dating down, but like, you can't, it's not always you're going to have the 1%. It was kind of open your eyes up to other options and type of people. Mixed collar dating, I think he called it, where you have these like super successful women maybe considering like a blue collar guy. And again, like really looking at what is our vision and what is informing that vision. And sometimes we have a very, very limited, and not to place all the onus on women because, men are out there not doing the best things either. But we can only control ourselves and do work for ourselves. So understanding like, what is my vision and why is that my vision of partnership?
Yeah, it's funny because like the masculine feminine thing, I talked about this with Sabrina too. I was like, I don't really buy into it because it's just more of, I look forward to the day that I have a man who I can relax a little bit with, but it's because I've never had someone who I can just trust is going to do what they say they're going to do. And I don't think that's a masculine or feminine thing. It's just being a good partner. But when it comes to dating, and I've talked about this too, about how, I just feel like a lot of women feel prejudged by men if they're seemingly more successful than them. And seemingly, again, it goes back to making more like the money thing. Like there's so many complexities in relationships. And I think to your point, it's like we can only control ourselves as women, but it's like, figuring out how we can meet men where they are, but also explaining how relationships have changed. Because I think
I think also if we're talking about like outdated blueprints, like these traditional relationship models are outdated. I mean, more women are graduating college than men. Women are starting to out earn men. So this old school traditional model as the men as the provider and the woman as the nurturer is outdated. And I think maybe we need just more time for a new model to evolve and to normalize a new model where it's more of a partnership and that can look different for everybody, And again, everything for me in the way I work as a therapist is so person-centered. So if you want a traditional model and that's true to your desire, you should find someone that also wants a traditional model. If you want something that looks different than that, being really clear on that and finding someone that also wants that. And it's too generalized to say, it should look like this or it should look like that. Like you have to decide for yourself what you want it to look like. And those things do come up. I mean, intimidation comes up. And so that's not the right person for you. If someone's judging you, also not the right person for you. And I think we also want to be careful that we're not making assumptions. That's why I do want more men to come on, because we might be holding these narratives that are not even true. And so, if you're dating someone and you're feeling like those things are coming up, again, curiosity is so great. It's like, are we assuming that they're intimidated by us or something else coming up for them?
Right. Yeah, because we've seen this talked about too, of like the male loneliness epidemic. And a lot of the articles that I've seen about the quote unquote male loneliness epidemic paint women as the problem. And I think that's also just furthering the gap instead of actually holding space for a real conversation, because I don't think it's that. Again, I think it's just a lot of things going back to the provider thing. I've talked about this on the podcast. My thoughts are how I think what a provider truly is, the definition has changed, right? Like in the past, being a provider was you're paying for the home, you're providing that space, you're going out and making the money. And then in exchange, the woman cooks, cleans, whatever. And I talked about how, to me, that's not being a provider because that's not what I need from a partner. To me, a provider is someone who's holding space for my emotions and who can help me navigate, who assures me and trusts me, like providing a place where I feel safe, seen, and heard. That is providing to me as a partner, but that's my definition. And I think if more people can understand what their definitions of a good partner are, maybe that will help bridge the gap. But I think a lot of this work I feel like has fallen on women, and men, instead of listening, just feel attacked. And it's like, of course, there's things that aren't helping that conversation. And there are women who are just like, I hate men, whatever. But how do you think, aside from, of course, we need more men on my podcast, your podcast, like, what message do you have for men and women alike of like how we can start opening these conversations?
Yeah, I think it's trying to gain an understanding of what each other's experience is without assuming what each other's experience is. I think we're kind of like polarizing each other's experience, and we're each in our own experience assuming what the other person's experience is and maybe placing blame. And, it shouldn't really be about placing blame. It should be about understanding each other. And again, I think everything we've talked about ties into that, like understanding ourselves, being curious, slowing down to, cultivate a space for understanding, communication, and clarity. I think there's really something to the work to kind of dismantle the traditional models. Richard Reeves wrote a book of Boys and Men, and it was kind of really fascinating to read sort of the state of men. I think the model has changed, right? And the way in which we needed men has completely changed. And it's sort of maybe this crisis for them to understand the new definition of provider, like you put it, right? So they have kind of been socialized to be, that's the role, that's the need I fill, and we don't really need them for that anymore. And they're kind of like floundering of like, okay, well, what do you even need me for? So I think, getting really clear on like why you still need this, want this partner, need this partner. What is the new definition of provider? What is the new construct for a relationship where everybody's needs are met and everybody feels heard and understood and safe?
Right. It's because it's so easy, especially with the content we see nowadays. Like we see a lot of women being like, I don't need a man, or like men used to go to war. Like, and of course there's funny jokes in that, but it is part of a larger conversation of, there is a crisis between men and women, and finding relationships that can work and go the distance, especially, in today's day and age. Now you see women's rights being attacked, divorce things are coming up. Like, it's a scary times. And instead of becoming polarized, there just needs to be curiosity and conversation around these issues.
Yeah. And compassion and empathy. And gosh, I know we've talked about so many things. This always happens to us. We could talk.
I know we can continue to go on and on and on
forever.
Because they're so fascinating topics. And there's no one right answer. And like, I always say, I'm not an authority on any of these things. Like, who am I? I'm just a girl. Like, these are my thoughts, feelings, like learnings through my own eyes. And I'm just sharing that perspective with the world just as you are. And I think the more people that share life and their perspective through their eyes and their experiences, the more conversation people can have, because it's a beautiful thing to be able to connect with others through our shared experiences.
Yeah, I just think we need to cultivate more cognitive dissonance in that nothing is right or wrong. Nobody is, I don't want to get political, but like we have created a lot of polarization and a lot of, oh my gosh, this is related, but not. I was just watching this incredible documentary called, it's the Karen Reed story, but it kind of creates this idea of like these two opposing sides of like, I'm team Karen, I'm team, I think the guy was John. And it's just like hatred and you're wrong. And it's like, no one's trying to sit down and be like, okay, well, why do you think that? Let me understand how you're thinking that. And more coming together, more desire to understand and desire to respect. Okay, like I get how you think about that. I don't think about it that way. And not, they're not being like hatred towards someone that feels differently than you about something.
Exactly. And one final question. Obviously, with all these things that we've talked about, a lot of this is work you have done with yourself. And what do you think is something that you've either learned about yourself through all of your work, or like the best thing that you've done for yourself to kind of be able to start getting in tune with yourself?
Slow down. Slow down has been so huge for me. I was definitely a packed calendar kind of girl, say yes to everything, fit it all in. Logistically having my son doesn't allow for that pace anymore. But even with having him, like I was like full speed ahead on everything. And then I found myself in a space where I'm simultaneously trying to have a full caseload, run a group practice, do a podcast, and navigate a fertility journey. And there comes a point where you just balls drop. And to your point earlier, like really what drops is our mental, emotional health. So for me, it's a way slower pace, a less full calendar, more time to sit and just be. That has been hugely beneficial for me. And I'm still working on it. It's very it's intentional. It's intentional to hold the boundaries around my time and being really clear. Is this supporting me? Is this worth my time? I don't mean to say that in a way that's like shitty, but like.
No, I get what you mean. Like there's a big difference between saying yes because you want the opportunity versus saying yes because you feel like you have to say yes to everything.
Yeah. And again, your body will tell you, like, if you're kind of like, oh God, I don't want to do that thing that's on my calendar, like, then it shouldn't be on your calendar.
Yeah. Easy peasy. And for people who obviously they should absolutely go listen to your podcast after hearing this conversation, where can they find you on socials and all your stuff?
Yeah. So on all socials, Quiet the Clock Pod on TikTok and Instagram. The podcast is called Quiet the Clock. So go to YouTube and subscribe. We're on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, kind of anywhere you can get your podcast. And my group practice is NYC Therapeutic Wellness. You can go to our website. We have amazing clinicians there if anyone's looking for support, especially support with some of the things that we talked about today. And that's where you can find me and my work.
Amazing. And Beth, thank you again for joining me. I know we could.
I love talking to you. I swear we need like a 10-hour sit down.
We need like a marathon episode or like a whole season of just you and I talking.
Yes, let's get the cameras following us around. Let's do it.
I look forward to the day that we can actually do something in a studio for sure.
Oh my God, I know. That's the other thing. More in-person things have helped me too. Like being at home and isolated, working from home and in front of the computer. While it's a great tool, like getting back into real life is really important.
For
real
sure.
world, real life.
That's how I felt too, like going from working a remote 9 to 5 to having my own business and being in front of people again has definitely helped me. It's helped me get my steps in every day. I will say too, getting more steps in a day. But Beth, thank you so much for joining me. Seriously, I can't wait to share this episode with people. Obviously, if they're listening now, we shared the episode. But that's all for me for this episode of Not the Girl Next Door. I'm your host, Meg Reynolds. Please make sure you give Beth's podcast a listen. Also, subscribe to our podcast if you haven't already. Leave us a 5-star review wherever you're listening. Subscribe to the YouTube. We're on Instagram at Not the Girl Next Door podcast. And I will see you guys next week for another episode. Bye for now.
Oh, gosh, so good.